Why, hello there. I'm Zisto. This is The Long Dark, and this is the first video in a new tutorial series all about the hardest difficulty in the sandbox mode, Interloper. I've heard a lot of stories of people being intimidated to try Interloper when they're more used to the lower difficulty levels. Numerically, it's harder. Things get colder, there's less items, and things decay faster. But the big difference between other difficulties is that all the best stuff doesn't show up at all. So you can't get a rifle, you can't find a handgun, can't find a hatchet or a hunting knife. You have to craft all that stuff yourself, and that introduces a big difficulty spike that I think scares a lot of people away. So I've played a little bit of Long Dark, and I'm decent at Interloper, so I thought I'd make a few videos to help people take the plunge. This first video is going to focus on the early game, so we're going to cover making a new character, surviving your first few days, scavenging for items, and then when we're ready, we'll travel to a forge, we'll make some tools, and then finally, we'll make a bow and arrow, so we'll become self-sufficient, we can hunt for our own food, and we don't need to scavenge anymore. Before we get started, I should mention that this video has a lot of information packed into it, and you may need to come back and reference something later. So in the description below, I've added a table of contents with timestamps, and I've also added links to a few other resources. And since the game world is static, but item placement is randomized, meaning you're never going to find the same thing in the same place every single time, what we're going to do, we're going to divide this video up, and we're going to talk first about landmarks, about navigating, how to get around. We're going to talk about where we're going, and what we'll be doing very vaguely, and then later we're going to go into more detail. So let's go ahead and let's start a new Interloper character. You can pick male or female, and this is totally cosmetic. It doesn't change anything except for some voice acting lines. You can pick 2 perks if you've unlocked any of them. The best perk by far is Cold Fusion. It'll make the world a little bit warmer. Efficient Machine and Firemaster and Free Runner and Snow Walker are all pretty decent. But since you may not have access to any of these, I'm not going to pick any perks for this run just to show you that you don't need them to survive. And you can also name your sandbox whatever you want. Click Accept, and we're going to spawn in randomly somewhere in the world. So after you spawn in, look around a little bit, and if you don't recognize where you are, you can hit the M key to go to the map view. We just started, so the map is blank. We haven't done any map making. But I can see in the top right corner what zone I'm in. I spawned in Timberwolf Mountain for this run. And if you hit the world map button, you can see how all the different zones are connected. So if your map knowledge isn't that great, you can at least see a little bit of context as to where you are. So here's the game plan for this run. You're going to spawn randomly into one of these zones, and then you want to make your way to Mystery Lake, scavenging as you go. Once we get to Mystery Lake, we're going to make a base at the dam. We're going to loot up all the different locations around Mystery Lake. When we're ready, we're going to go to Forlorn Muskeg to forge tools and arrowheads. And then we're going to come back to the Mystery Lake Dam, and we're going to make a bow and arrow. Since I have no way of knowing the relative map knowledge of someone watching this video, what we'll do now is highlight some basic landmarks for the different spawn points to help you navigate if you've never been in one of these areas. If you spawn into Forlorn Muskeg, you want to try to make your way to the railroad running through the middle of the zone. Be careful walking over weak ice for more than a few seconds so you don't fall in. Once you get to the railroad, you can follow it to the Poacher's Camp, which has a fire barrel, which you can use to warm up if you found matches already. Otherwise, follow the rail all the way to the tunnel that will take you to Mystery Lake. If you end up in Broken Railroad, obviously you went the wrong way. If you spawn into Desolation Point, you'll be following the coastline west all the way to Coastal Highway. Walk past the lighthouse and climb up to the hill. You can either go up to the church or along the road, depending on where the wolves are. But you'll need to turn up to the path that will lead you to the Transition Cave, which has a lot of coal. Once you get to Crumbling Highway, keep following the coast, watching out for wolves until you find the exit. Just follow the road. Once you get to Coastal Highway, keep following the coast until you get all the way to the fishing camp. Climb the hill behind the fishing camp until you find either a frozen stream or you find the road. And you can follow either of those up the hill until you hit the railroad, which will take you all the way to Mystery Lake. If you spawn into Timberwolf Mountain like I did, you'll be looking for Crystal Lake, which has a cabin on the shore. Go past the cabin to the right, and keep going until you hit the landing gear, and then walk uphill to find a path that will take you to Pleasant Valley. Once you get into Pleasant Valley, you'll have to climb down a rope to get to the Prepper's Cache, and the route I usually take is to curve around to the right to find the hunting blind, and then take a sharp left And then there's some rocks on the right you need to walk around to find the plane crash. You can go through the plane, and you can find a lot of early game clothing here. And then past the wreckage on the left is a cave. Past the cave is a path that will take you down to the frozen stream, and the stream forms sort of like a T-junction. You don't want to go left or right, you want to go straight past it, and you want to walk until you pass under a bridge. At this point, to your left, a short walk away is the barn, and to your right immediately is the farmhouse. If you randomly spawn into Pleasant Valley itself, the first thing you want to do is try to get a view of the center of the map where there's a lot of farmland, and make your way to either the barn or the farmhouse. Once you're at one of those, what you're looking for is the signal tower. Walk up either side of the mountain that has the signal tower to get to the Signal Hill radio station. Behind the Signal Hill tower is a field of trees, and then behind that is a cave. Close to the cave is a hunting blind, and if you walk down the hill from there, you'll see a cave that'll take you to the Winding River. Once you're in the Winding River, keep walking until you see the dam, and then you'll take a path on your left. You won't be able to go in the door from this side, so you'll have to cross the ledge and climb in a broken window. Travel through the dam to get to Mystery Lake. If you happen to spawn into Hushed River Valley or Ash Canyon, good luck, I guess. These are very advanced zones, and they're a little bit too complicated for me to go over for this video. So anyway, wherever you spawned, you should make your way to Mystery Lake, and while I'm not going to highlight all the different areas in Mystery Lake, what I will do is show the ones visible from the rail line. If you're very new to the game, you're trying to learn different areas and regions and locations, I recommend starting with the rail line and the coastline. Starting in Broken Railroad, you can follow the railroad all the way to Coastal Highway, and then the coastline all the way to Desolation Point. And that's a large percent of the total zones in the game, and the benefit there is that you can follow either of them, even in the heaviest of blizzards. Anyway, Mystery Lake, starting from the Forlorn Muskeg side. After walking a short distance, on the right is the camp office with the frozen lake, some fishing huts, and several cabins. Then the derailment with the forestry lookout above. Once you come to the train loading area and the passenger car, on the right is a frozen stream, which connects back to the frozen lake. On the left is a road, and if you follow that road a short distance, you'll find some trailers. Just past the loading area, on the left is the dam where we'll be making our base, and just beyond that is the ravine. The only real drawback to using the dam as your main base is that it doesn't have a bed, so you'll have to use a bedroll to sleep. But other than that, it's got everything. It's got a lot of floor space to spread out your hides and your guts and your saplings to cure. It's got shelves and lockers to put all your stuff in. And right around the corner here is a crafting bench. It's also the most centrally located base in the game, right in the middle of Mystery Lake, Pleasant Valley, and Coastal Highway, so you're never going to be too far away when you need to come back and either resupply or drop off things. It's also going to give us a completely safe environment to craft our rabbit and deer hide clothing. We'll talk more about that later. And once we make a bow and arrow, we can safely hunt for deer without worrying about wolves, since the ravine is the one location in the game with no wolves. And you can get to the ravine safely by climbing over the rocks like this, bypassing any wolves that might be hanging out in this area. So let's talk about the ravine. When you're new to Interloper, the ravine is going to be your best friend. It's got tons of resources, lots of sticks, birch bark, saplings. It's got deer, it's got rabbits, it's got a flare gun and an emergency stim. And most importantly, there are no wolves or bear or moose. So if, for instance, you need to recover from an attack, your health is really low, the ravine is the place to go. So let's go over the different locations in the ravine. When you enter, if you follow the railroad and the left wall of the zone, you'll eventually come to a train crash. This is a good place to find some spare metal and some lantern fuel. And it's one of the two locations you'll want to check for a mountaineering rope, which you are going to need. When you enter the zone, instead of hugging the left wall, if you hug the right wall, you'll eventually come to a cave. This is going to be your place to sleep whenever you have cabin fever risk from all of the crafting you'll be doing. It's a good place to read books, and you'll be hunting your deer here as well. Walking farther down the right side of the map, you'll come to the rope spot. If you didn't find a mountaineering rope in the train car, you'll want to cross the fallen tree bridge. And a short distance later, on your left, you'll see another cave. This is the second location to check for a mountaineering rope. If you don't find a mountaineering rope in either of these locations, you'll have to backtrack into Mystery Lake to find one. But one way or another, you're going to want to find a mountaineering rope and attach it to the rock and climb down into the lower part of the ravine. In this passenger car, you're going to find an emergency stim and the very important flare gun. The flare gun is going to be your emergency get-out-of-jail-free card. Firing it at any animal in the game will make them run away, and it also has the potential to one-shot any animal in the game. And a little bit farther down on the right is a cave. As a little bit of warning, when you climb down into the ravine, your clothing probably won't be very good, so make sure you have enough firewood to last through at least enough of the night to where you can sleep to get your health back. You're going to need a full energy bar to climb back up the rope. Eventually, when you're ready, you'll need to make the trek all the way to the forge in Forlorn Muskeg. So first, let's go over getting between the dam and the camp office. You can use the same method you used to get to the ravine to leave the dam to check for wolves. You can even walk along the fence for a little bit if you want. There's usually a wolf lurking around this area, so depending on which way he forces you to walk, if you walk along the rail line, once you get to this passenger car, you want to turn sharply to the left, or if he forces you down onto the frozen stream, you want to get to this point, and then you want to walk uphill to these rocks. Once you get to these rocks, you're going to be walking parallel with the railroad, and as long as you're not carrying any stink, you will never encounter wolves up here. It will be completely safe every single time you do it. The only drawback is that you'll probably sprain your ankle or a wrist doing this, so be sure to have bandages. You can follow this path all the way until you get to the camp office, and then you can warm up there. I'm not going to show any detailed maps for this video, but what I will do briefly is go back to the main menu to create a new character on a lower difficulty menu, because on lower difficulties you get to pick your spawn, and when you click on a zone it'll show you a very not detailed map of what the area vaguely looks like. So, because we're about to enter Forlorn Muskeg, which a lot of players feel a little bit intimidated by, it can be very confusing, it gets really foggy, I'm just going to point out the basics of what we're doing. We just left the dam right here, and we walked parallel to the rail line over here to the camp office, which is right about here. And then after warming up and or sleeping the night, we're going to walk down the railroad down to this point, at which point we'll enter into Forlorn Muskeg. We can see what that looks like here. It's got the railroad going down the middle and a lot of ice which you can fall in, but it also has a lot of islands. Anyway, we are going to enter through here. We're going to walk down to the Poacher's Camp, which is right about here. And then we're going to cross the ice, cross the islands until here. Walk a little bit over the land until we get to the Spence Farm where the forge is right here. We're going to forge all of our stuff. And when we're done, we have two choices. We can either go back across the islands, preferring a different route so you can pick up fresh cattails and stuff like that. Go back to the rail line. Go back to Poacher's Camp to warm up if you need to. Then travel along the rail line. There's also a really good spot right here, which I'll show in a minute for warming up, protected from the wind for making a fire. You can travel through here, and on the other side, there's another good spot right there as well, which I will also show. If you don't want to do that way, another option, because we've just burned through all of our firewood, making all of the tools and arrowheads and stuff, you can travel this way. There's a few caves that you can warm up in, and then you can travel up to the overlook up here. And then you can travel down the hill and back to the dam to make your bow and arrow. So, in-game, we're going to walk from camp office to the Forlorn Muskeg tunnel. When you get into Forlorn Muskeg, watch out for wolves on the left and a bear on the right. Just keep your distance from either one and keep going until you get to the Poacher's Camp. This is a good place to warm up and also make fresh torches. Forlorn Muskeg can get really foggy, which can be confusing. When you're walking around and you can't see, it's easy to get disoriented. But one thing you can do to check that you're walking in the right direction is to drop one single stick on the ground. When you drop a stick on the ground, it'll always face north. The bottom of the stick is to the south. And with this reference point, we know if we want to get to Spence Farm, we need to go southwest. So when you're ready, start walking across the snow. If you need to warm up, be sure to drink teas or make another fire. And if you do happen to fall into the ice, don't panic. Just realize you're not going to be able to go that direction. Look for a different route. Once you get to the other side, watch out for wolves, but otherwise make your way to the west until you get to the bunkhouses and then to Spence Farm. You want to make a fire right away because it'll take a while to get hot enough to forge your items. And while you're at it, you can scavenge around the area. There's two little ruined cabins out on the ice, which has coal and metal and a few other things. When you finish forging, you can either go back across the islands in the direction of the railroad, and when you get to the railroad, follow it to the Poacher's Camp and then out of the zone. Or you can travel along the southern edge of the map And on your right, you'll find one cave, and then a little farther on, another cave. These are good places to warm up and or sleep if you need to. Past the second cave, up on a hill, is the Forlorn Muskeg Overlook. Once you get to the top, there's a hollow tree, which is a good spot to make a fire to warm up. When you're done, you can climb down the steep snow slope. Just crouch and move slowly. Walking back to the railroad, watch out for wolves on the right. Close to the exit, if you need a spot to warm up, there's a little cubby hole to the left. Alternatively, you can make a fire right on the other side of the transition tunnel, just behind this train car with lumber on it. From there, it's a short walk to the camp office, and then you'll use the same technique to get back to the dam that we used to get to the camp office. Walking over the hill parallel to the rail line. So now that we've covered all the major landmarks and how we'll be navigating between them, let's back up to where we started. I happen to spawn in Timberwolf Mountain, so I'll be making my way to the cabin on Crystal Lake. Wherever you spawn, start collecting resources as you try to get to the nearest shelter or building. If you don't know where the nearest shelter is, explore in a direction, try to remember as much as possible. The game world is pretty big, and learning it is going to take some time. Don't be worried if you die a lot at first, just try to learn something each time. Anyway, the outdoor resources you'll want right away, you'll want to look for sticks for fires. They're found anywhere where you can see trees. You'll want to be picking up mushrooms, rose hips, and birch bark. You'll be chopping these up and brewing them into teas, mostly for staying warm, but also occasionally for medicinal reasons. You want to pick up Old Man's Beard Lichens in sets of 3 to make anti-infection bandages in case you get attacked by a wolf or a bear. If you're in an area that has cattails, they're very useful. They come in 2 pieces. The stalk is lightweight food that never spoils, useful forever. And the cattail head you'll be using as tinder, along with your sticks to make fires. If you're not in an area with cattails, you'll have to rip up newspapers or break down sticks for fire tinder. And lastly, you want to pick up a few stones in case you encounter some wolves so you can distract them. You can also use them to stun rabbits, which are useful for early game calories, basically. So, when you reach shelter, you may or may not find matches, or a fire striker, or a mag lens. If not, you'll have to scavenge and move on. I did find matches, and this cabin is pretty cold, so I'm going to make my first fire now. If you're in an area with buildings that are warmer, and if you can find toilets for toilet water, you can delay making your first fire. If you're making your fire outside, try to place it so it's going to be protected from the wind as much as possible. For your first fire, your fire starting chance is going to be low. So depending on what you find, you may have some options to boost your fire starting chance. If you find a book, starting your fire with that instead of some sticks will boost your fire starting chance. If you find accelerant, that'll give you an automatic 100% start chance. If you find a flare, you can light that and it'll last long enough to give you multiple attempts. If you happen to find a fire striker, it has a higher percent start chance than matches. And in the off chance that you find a mag lens early on and it happens to be sunny outside, you can use that instead of using matches. Otherwise, if you don't find any of that, like I didn't, you're probably going to have to spend several matches making your first fire. If so, don't worry about it too much. You'll find plenty of matches in the long run. Once your fire's lit, put enough fuel on the fire to get warm. On Interloper, you start with just 1 can to make water with. While it boils and you warm up, scavenge around for food, clothing, and other supplies. I also recommend that you chop up any tea ingredients you may have collected and make 1 or 2 teas. When they're done, put them by the fire so they stay warm. You'll want to pull many torches from the fire. From now on, until your fire starting skill gets much higher, you want to start all your fires with torches. Your chance to start a fire with a match is pretty low at this point, but your chance to start a torch with a match is always guaranteed. So you light a torch with a match, and then you can start the fire with the torch, so you can make several attempts to start a fire with your lit torch. This way you don't waste any matches. Depending on the time of day, you have to decide if you're going to stay the night or move on. This cabin I'm in is too cold to sleep with my current early game clothing. that I started with. So I have to keep going, plus there's daylight left, and I want to make as much progress as possible in these first few days. When you're ready to move on, grab your warm teas and a fresh torch, and anything else you're taking with you. When your torch duration gets low, just drop it on the ground and use it to light the next one. A lit torch provides a minor warmth bonus, but more importantly, it lets you carry your fire to your next destination, potentially letting you start multiple fires with just one match, which is really useful early on when you don't have many matches. You can also scare wolves if you encounter one, and you have a lit torch by dropping the torch, standing near it, and aiming a rock at them. This also works with a lit flare or a lit campfire, but it does not work with a lantern, a fire barrel, or a wood-burning stove. It has to be exposed fire to scare them. I should mention, scaring wolves like this is your last option. You should always try to avoid them or go around them if that's possible. When your warmth bar gets about halfway down, drink one of your warm teas to warm up a bit. And then once it drops about halfway again, you can drink the second one. From the radio menu, orange text means the tea is still warm, and the blue means it's cold. When you get to the next shelter, if your torch is still lit, you can start another fire to warm up. If not, you got to make a decision. Are you going to use a match to start a new fire? Maybe you can go inside to use a bed to warm up by passing time or sleeping. Or maybe you keep going and you risk hypothermia without warming up. It's up to you. And this is where your knowledge of the immediate area and what's nearby is going to come in handy. So this is the early gameplay loop, more or less. You move from shelter to shelter, you scavenge supplies, and you make your way towards Mystery Lake. Once we get to Mystery Lake, we're going to be pretty thorough, searching all the different locations. As you're traveling between areas, you want to keep an eye on how tired you are, as well as the time of day, and you want to try to sync those up so that you can go to sleep when you get tired, when it's nighttime. So if it's late in the day and you have a lot of energy, you should sprint more. If it's early in the day and you're kind of tired, you need to sprint less. You also need to keep in mind how far away the next location is where you'll be able to sleep, and whether or not you'll be able to get to it at the current speed you're able to travel. Your condition bar, which is what your life bar is called in this game, will usually decrease throughout the day. You'll lose 1% of your condition per hour if you're tired or hungry. You'll lose 2% per hour if you're thirsty, and you'll lose close to 20% per hour if you're cold. If any of your bars are in the red, you'll be losing condition. If they're all in the white, you'll be gaining condition, but only at 1% per hour when you're awake. When you're sleeping, however, you gain 2% per hour, and you get additional bonuses for sleeping longer. So before you sleep, you want to make sure that your tiredness hits red, so that you can sleep a full 10 hours. This will allow you to recover a large chunk of your health each day, which will offset the health you lose by either being hungry or cold each day. You can also conserve resources by waiting until right before you go to bed to eat each day. You'll lose 12 to 15% of your condition during the day, being hungry, and then you can get it back when you sleep at night. So as you're going through this gameplay loop of getting cold and then warming up, getting tired and then sleeping, you're going to be finding items as you scavenge around. You want to be looking for general clothing upgrades, you want to be looking for food, and you want to be looking for a series of tools. And while you're doing that, you want to be working on getting together all the things you need to forge, as well as making some early game animal clothing out of rabbit and deer hides. By the time you get to Mystery Lake and visit most of the areas there, you're likely to find everything you need, but if you're having trouble locating one item in specific, in the description below, I'll add a link to a spreadsheet of the 4 different loot tables Interloper uses for important items. So if you can't find a specific item, you can use that as a reference. So first let's talk about forging, because it's the most important. First thing you're going to want is a bedroll. While not strictly necessary, it's going to give you a lot more options. It'll let you sleep anywhere, like in a cave, and also lets you warm up quickly by a fire by stacking the fire warmth bonus with the bedroll warmth bonus. The next thing you're going to want is a hacksaw, and you're going to be using this to cut down saplings. You're going to look for maple saplings, which are used for bows, and you're going to look for birch saplings, which are used for arrows. You can also use it to saw up meat and guts from frozen carcasses. And you're going to need 2 of those guts to make 1 bow. The maple, the birch, and the guts need to cure, so you need to put them on the ground inside somewhere or in a cave. And you can make sure that they've started to cure if they immediately say 1% cured when you drop them. You're also going to need some feathers for your arrows, and these are found anywhere you see corpses in the game, due to the crows that fly overhead. Periodically, you're going to see metal scrap, and you're going to want to be collecting these. You'll need these to make tools, and also to make arrowheads. You can also use your hacksaw to saw up shelves to get some extra scrap metal. You're going to need 5 scrap to make a hatchet, and 3 scrap to make a knife. 1 scrap will make 2 arrowheads, and you want anywhere from 12 to 20. So the total amount of scrap you need is anywhere from 14 to 20. However, you're going to find some extra scrap on your way to the forge and at the buildings around the forge. So realistically, the number of scrap you're looking for before leaving to forge is about 12. You're going to want to be collecting cloth, which has a variety of purposes. You'll need it to make your tools, but you'll also be turning it into bandages and using it to repair your early game clothing. The best place to get cloth by far is by ripping up curtains inside buildings. And you want to find a hammer. There's typically 1 of these per zone, but you won't find them in a zone with a forge. So there won't be 1 in Forlorn Muskeg, and there won't be 1 in Desolation Point. You're going to need this to forge your tools and your arrowheads at the forge, but you can also use this to break up furniture and pallets to get some reclaimed wood for fires. Until you make your improvised hatchet, the heavy hammer is also going to be your first line of defense if you get attacked by a wolf. So even though it's heavy, you always want to be carrying the hammer with you until you go to the forge. When you're ready to go to the forge, you want to bring with you your scrap metal, a few pieces of cloth, your heavy hammer, as well as any coal or firewood you've found up to this point. You'll also want to gather cattails for food as you travel through the Forlorn Muskeg. When you get to the forge, you want to start a fire right away because it's going to take a while for the fire to get hot enough. While it heats up, you can look through containers, as well as break down planks and boxes for extra firewood. It's worth noting that one of the boxes underneath has dog food in it, and one of the boxes up top has accelerant. Once the temperature maxes out using everything besides coal, it's going to take 4 pieces of coal to get the fire hot enough to forge. The hatchet is going to replace the heavy hammer as your primary defense against wolves if you get attacked. And it has the added benefit that it will cut the wolf, which means they'll bleed out and eventually die. Otherwise, its only other main use is for chopping up firewood. The improvised knife is going to be extremely important. It's the tool you'll be using to craft your bow, your arrows, as well as your bear, your wolf, and your moose hide clothing. You'll also use it to quarter animals and to slice meat. Arrowheads take an hour to craft, so you can make 2 sets while simultaneously boiling a pot of water. When you're done forging, you can leave your hammer at the forge and make your way back to Mystery Lake and the dam. Now that you've got an improvised knife, cured saplings, and cured guts, you can make a bow. With your knife, you can turn a cured birch sapling into 3 arrow shafts. And then with feathers and arrowheads, you can turn those into arrows. If you've found quality tools along your journey, it's recommended that you leave it by your workbench, as it'll cut the crafting time for arrows in half. If you haven't found quality tools, normal tools is your next best option. Congratulations! You now have a bow and arrows, and you can go into the ravine and hunt some deer. So that covers forging and making a bow and arrow. Now let's talk about animal hide clothing. You need an improvised knife to make clothing out of wolf, bear, or moose hides, but you only need a sewing kit to make clothing out of rabbit or deer hides. Once you get to the dam, you can start accumulating rabbit hides, deer hides, and guts and leaving them to cure. The reason you want to wait until you get to the dam to start harvesting animal carcasses is because it's very dangerous to travel while you're carrying anything stinky. When you're carrying raw meat or guts, wolves will notice you from a much greater distance, and they won't always growl as they approach, so you may not notice that they've noticed you until it's too late. In the ravine, there's several spots to look for rabbits. Following the rail line on the left is a small spot with rabbits. If you follow the right side of the ravine, down by the rope rock, you'll usually find rabbits there. If you go across the tree bridge to the second cave on the left, there's usually 3 rabbits here. And when you go down the rope to get the stim and flare gun, you'll usually find a rabbit or 2 by the cave. To capture rabbits, it's possible to use snares, but in my opinion, it's mostly a waste of time. It's much faster to use rocks to stun rabbits. To hit a rabbit, you're aiming for in between your thumbnail and the tip of your finger. Then you just have to pick them up before they recover. Around the dam and the ravine, you'll see ravaged deer carcasses. These locations are random, so you won't see every one every time you play. In front of the dam in the fenced-in yard is the first place to look. Behind the dam, up on a rock, is the second one. And across the ledge, just before the broken window you crawl in, is the third. In the ravine, there's a chance for a ravaged deer carcass in front of the first cave. You can also find a ravaged deer carcass by the rope rock. And a third deer carcass can be found when you climb down the rope to get the flare gun, sitting in front of the cave. It takes 3 days to cure a rabbit hide, and 5 days to cure both the deer hides and the guts. With 3 rabbit hides and 1 gut, you can make a hat. With 4 rabbit hides and 2 guts, you can make some gloves. With 3 deer hides and 4 guts, you can make pants. And with 2 deer hides and 4 guts, you can make boots. And crafting these 4 items will significantly boost your warmth bonus. So we've talked about forging and making a bow and arrow. We've talked about making your early animal hide clothing. Let's wrap up by talking about everything else, all the stuff you might want to carry around with you day to day. Obviously, you're always going to want some method of starting fires, and enough fuel to last at least a few hours. Coal is by far the most valuable fuel. It provides a ton of heat, and it has the best weight to duration ratio of all the different fuel types. You may also want 1 or 2 books or some accelerant to make fire starting easier. The weight from your fire fuel can add up quickly, so drop excess fire supplies at your base. Once you've found some, you're always going to want at least a few stims on you at all times. They are one of your get out of jail free cards. They will save you from dying if you mess up really bad. You'll want 4 to 6 bandages to deal with sprains and also to stop bleeding if you get attacked. You want to carry around a way to stop infections, a way to deal with food poisoning, and a way to deal with pain. You can use scavenged medicine or you can make your own remedies. Antiseptic in particular is extremely heavy, so I would replace that as soon as possible with Old Man's Beard Lichen. Only about half of your clothing is going to come from animal hides, the rest you'll have to scavenge, so be on the lookout for ear wraps, tucks, wool socks, Mackinac jacket, combat pants, thin wool sweater, and long underwear. Of these, the best item is probably the combat pants, which are fairly rare. Best place to look for these is the Signal Hill Radio Tower. You've got about a 50% chance of finding them there. They're very warm, but they don't provide much wind chill, so they're great to put underneath your deer hide pants. For food, you're always going to want a little bit of water. Be careful carrying too much water as it weighs a lot. You'll always want some kind of lightweight backup food, and your best option there is a box of crackers. It's the lightest food in the game. It never spoils, you'll never get food poisoning from it, and it doesn't give off scent. Also really useful and much more common are cattail stalks. For your tools, you'll always want some combination of a pot or a can to make water in. Some people like carrying 2 pots, some people like carrying 2 cans. I recommend 1 pot, 1 can. You'll always want a handful of stones for manipulating animals, sometimes for stunning rabbits, sometimes for distracting wolves. Once you get it, you're always going to want your flare gun. It is your other get out of jail free card in addition to the emergency stim. Until your fire starting gets higher, you're always going to want some torches. Also very useful is a lantern or flares. Early on, you'll want a pry bar for opening lockers and locked trunks of cars. You'll want sewing kits for repairing clothing, whetstones for sharpening your knife and hatchet, can opener for opening cans, and you'll usually want to carry around 1 or 2 skill books for when you have downtime, like when you get stuck inside in a blizzard. So that does it for this video. I hope it was helpful. If you were on the fence or nervous about trying Interloper, hopefully this gives you some tools to try it out. In the future, we'll go more in detail into the different skills in the game and how to level them. We'll talk about the different game mechanics and how you can manipulate them to your benefit. And we'll talk in depth about each different animal, how to avoid them, how to hunt them, how to make use of their hides. And I'll probably add videos about specific things like how to get to the summit of Timberwolf Mountain. Until then, bye-bye.